Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya al mursaleen. Amma ba'du. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We're on the 12th couplet now of the Munfarijah. So last week I think we got the 12th couplet, which is Shahidat bi ajaibiha hujajun qamat bil amri al hujaji, which I've called the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shahidat bi ajaibiha hujajun. Many a sign has testified to their glory, standing as the resounding proofs for each other, for each matter. So this is prior to that. We said we talked about accepting fate. So the context of this was we spoke about how life can be very normal, and then all of a sudden change and change for sometimes the better and sometimes for the worse. So he says all of this, there is something measured about life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created and weaved everything in your life, every peak, every trough. He weaved it into our lives because it was always meant to be the way it has turned out. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in this he used this metaphor of weaving this. Just imagine this great a blanket, which with this intricate design, and if there were a few blemishes, if there were a few blemishes from our perspective, we felt like something wasn't right, then you have to just look at a perspective where you look at the whole. It's like Maulana Rumi, he said, what does an ant know of the value of a Persian carpet? So when you're in the thick of it, you don't really see the big picture, and the big picture is the beauty of the whole intricate design. And the problem with difficulties, calamities, as is the case when we have unexpected success, when we're completely overwhelmed by calamity, and when we're completely overwhelmed or drowned in success, where everyone around us is telling us we're great, or we're getting a lot of yes people around us who are we're at the top of our game, then in both cases, the one thing that we lose straight away is perspective. That's the very first thing you lose, which is why the most successful people in the world have never make it on their own. Like, you don't become successful on your own. You have to be around people who are intelligent. You have to tap into the intelligence of the group. You cannot achieve any success, any serious success, by just doing everything yourself. Even people who run these internet businesses probably sit at home and spend hours a day trying to work it out. They all build their success by looking at existing models of success and they imitate them. In fact, it's absurd. It would be ridiculous to look at something that works and is successful and to decide, I'm just going to do that, I'm going to start again. Nobody does that. And those who do very quickly fizzle out because they don't get very far. And I think they quickly learn that there's a reason why that model worked. So what happens is success comes through by being around people who are, by surrounding ourselves with intelligent people. But one of the pitfalls of success is, especially when it suddenly hits you, when let's say you have a windfall, you suddenly get a lot of money, is we haven't built that network. You haven't grown it from having nothing to building its fundamentals with a lot of blood and sweat, and then building a network of people that you trust around you. And in doing so, losing a lot of people that you once trusted, and learning that actually they're not people to be trusted. Gaining friendships and breaking friendships, all of that process, those scars that you have that get you to that point of success, what they do is they teach you that ultimately you got to keep your eye on the bigger picture, that you cannot allow just one relationship with somebody kind of let you take your eye off the ball, because you've got too many scars to allow that to happen. So people who have that kind of battle experience, they're battle hardened. What that means is that they always stay true to the objective, and they're willing to they're willing to accept the calamities along the way, because they know that actually to dwell too much on those issues means that you lose focus on the real reason why you started out, whatever you started out. So people who suddenly come across this don't have those battle scars. And what that means is it's very easy to fall into a trap of surrounding ourselves with people who just kind of blow smoke into us, that tell us that we're you're amazing and everything that you do is brilliant and anything that you touch turns to gold, and that sort of Midas touch type thing. So it's very easy to do that, and that's a trap. And that's one of the things that celebrityism does, is that it very quickly catapults people into these into a platform where they have suddenly go from a few hundred or a few thousand people that take an interest in them from a distance, to millions of people around the world that worship everything that they do. So catapulting them to that level of success where they don't have the infrastructure to help them survive, it means that very quickly they get sucked into, not everyone, but a lot of people get, I think that the norm is that you get sucked into this mindset of you must be brilliant, and this kind of self-glorification, which is reinforced by the people around you. And that's very destructive. It's very destructive. It's literally what friendship is there to make sure that real friendship is there to prevent that from happening. So these very superficial friendships can destroy somebody, because you don't have the scars or the time to learn from that. And in the same way, people who go through hardship, which is probably something that we experience more of, in terms of the most people don't have. Everyone has successes in their life, but most people don't consciously think of, they can't just think of 5 major successes in their life, right? Most people can't just off the cuff think of that. And I guess that's because we've got our life experience too, that you have, if having a child was your great milestone, well, once you've had 5 children, then it suddenly becomes, what we do is we just say, well, it's 5 children, it's all 4 children or 3 children. And not only that, but when you spent, it's one thing having a child, is bringing that child up is the hard thing. It's actually spending the years to nurture them into a good human being, somebody who's going to be a valuable contributor of society. That's hard work. Which means you don't have the time to glory and revel in you having produced this child, because you're constantly worrying that have you done a good enough job. So even the things that are good in our life, it's very hard to be able to pin them as our major successes. I don't think people generally do that. Whereas it's very easy for us to fall into the if I said, what are some of the things that have gone wrong in your life? It's very easy to kind of unravel that story, and people often you can start that conversation off in an elevator, and by the time you've got to the 3rd floor, they've told you about their wife, their children, their neighbors, their car troubles, their the cricket teams they didn't get into, the football match that they didn't win. I mean, anything and everything, and often we've kind of fall back onto that sort of conversation because it almost flows more naturally. So when we're going through hardships, anyway, so when you have difficulties and when you have these major moments of triumph, in both instances, one of the things that we tend to lose is perspective. We tend to lose perspective, and the people that have perspective are the people who maybe have built up that success, where they have so many scars that they don't have the time to, they're focused on their goal. And people who have gone through tribulation and they have lived in that tribulation for a long time, they see things differently too, which is why the mindset of somebody who lives a very ordinary, reasonably comfortable, successful life in the UK, who's lost somebody, and somebody who lives in a part of the world where they're constantly around people who are passing away, they always live with the expectation that nothing's permanent, and that they've probably lost family members before. Their mindsets will be very, very different, and that's just a product of, I guess, environment. So most of us fall into that middle category of people who generally are don't fit into the constantly going through hardships or constantly having these elated moments of success where we lose that sort of we don't live in that. We live in that middle, which is everything's just normal and kind of just every day is just a different day, but it's the same sort of day too. So I think most of us fall into that category, and what happens is then when we're hit by either of those, we're just not prepared for it. We have we haven't built up a tolerance for either of those two extremes, and that's what the Sheikh says in this in this, I guess in this 11th couplet where he says, he says that when times appear measured and everything is just kind of ticking along, and then he said, all of a sudden something changes, everything changes. He said, know that that was always meant to be. Right? That change is always meant to be, and it's always going to happen. In other words, that we have to prepare for a future that may not be as normal, as accepting, as tolerant, and as pleasing as it is right now. We have to be prepared for these sorts of things. We have to, and that means psychological preparation of just accepting certain very basic things like nothing's permanent. None of the material goods that we have are permanent. None of the people that we're around are permanent. Our lives are not permanent. Just almost saying that out loud and reflecting on it for a few moments whenever you can is itself quite a big buffer that we're preparing with, rather than ignoring that reality. He says, "Shahidat bi ajaibiha hujajun." He says, many signs have testified to the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to the perfection of his wisdom, and the perfection of how he has created everything, meaning everything is weaved perfectly. Qamat bil amri ala al hujaji. He said that if ever you doubt for a second, when you have one of those moments where life just suddenly changes, if for whatever, if in that moment, if someone was to just instantaneously forget that this was supposed to be, he says, there are plenty, just go to the Quran, just look around you, and you'll see that everything has this perfect order. Everything has the perfect order. And every bit of chaos is itself a form of order. Like there's certain chaoses that are necessary. The chaos of the waves crashing into the sea is a chaos that brings about order, that's a part of a natural nizam, a natural order that must be. The chaos of how just the animal kingdom works, in seeing how you have predatory animals that will attack their prey. That's if someone were to witness that, it seems like a very brutal thing. How you can have a pride of lions attack wildebeest, for example, and you see how horrific that can be. But actually, in that there's the order of life. In that there is the order of life, and that's kind of I suppose what he's saying, in that everything that appears chaotic from our perspective, our very limited perspective, the ant in the Persian rug, actually from another perspective, it's not chaos. It's the chaos to you that's the order in the grand scheme of things. And the resounding proof for that is the very fact that we exist, the fact that the earth is spinning on its axis, that the fact that the earth spins perfectly, circumambulates the sun, the fact that the moon goes around the earth. Every one of these things is perfect down to less than a millimeter, and any slight change in that would completely disrupt the entire, if not lead to immediate destruction of everything, life as you know it, it would at least destroy the ecosystem, relatively speaking, very quickly. From a kind of a universe perspective, it will destroy it very quickly. But yet, it's been created, it's been formed in such a way that everything is perfectly in line, and this works just meticulously to sustain life. Couplet number 13, he says, وَرِضَى بِقَضَاءِ اللَّهِ حُجًا. Now he goes on to what all of this leads to, which is this idea of contentment. He says, rida, that ultimately we are all we're all aiming for rida, which is to be content with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that whether we see the majesty, the majestic design of the Persian rug or not, whether we see it or not, if we have faith in the one who created it, in the craftsmanship and the workmanship of the one who created the rug, then you can have faith in the quality of the rug without ever seeing the big picture. And that's contentment. That's rida in the qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, وَرِضَى بِقَضَاءِ اللَّهِ حُجًا فَعَلَى مَرْكُوزَتِهِ فَعِجِي. And contentment with God's decree is the fruit or purpose, and is served according to one's station. Fa'iji, he said, so turn towards it. Yeah. So contentment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree is the fruit, it's the purpose, yeah. It's the aim, it's where everything is supposed to be going towards. That's what we should be directing ourselves towards. فَعَلَى مَرْكُوزَتِهِ فَعِجِي. So each and every one of us, according to our ability, according to our rank, we should all try to direct ourselves towards pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing what's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and being pleased by the decree of God. وَإِذَا انْفَتَحَتْ أَبْوَابُ هُدَى فَعْجَلْ بِخَزَائِنِهَا وَلِكِ. And he says, because when the doors of guidance open, so in this time of hardship, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to open his doors of guidance, his doors of rahmah, his mercy, he said hasten to their fa'jal, he said hasten towards bi khaza'iniha, go after the treasures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up, waliji, and he said, and stand firm. Stand firm. And that's a metaphor to say when hardship comes, rather than trying to escape it, a lot of what we've discussed over the last few weeks is this idea of we don't want to escape. We're not trying to escape our fears or escape the hardship. Rather, it's coming to accept that hardship is a part of life, and it's a necessary part of life. And yes, we have to do whatever we can to avoid it, avoid falling into hardship. But when it comes and when we have it, either we become discontented and we get frustrated and we get and we lose motivation, and we lose direction, or what we do is we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we increase our ibadah, we increase our faith in God and our connection to God. And that's what he means by, he said, hasten towards the treasures, meaning when that happens, when you're in that state, the more you try and direct yourself towards God, the more reward that you're getting. So you're kind of amassing these treasures rather than running from it. And he says, waliji, and he said, and stand firm, meaning in that, don't try and rush the decree of God, no more than you try to rush when you're at the peak of your success. You're not rushing God to kind of bring you down from that peak. So no more than that should we be rushing God. In terms of when we're going through difficulty that we can't physically do anything about. All of this is predicated, of course, on where you are. And I'm just going to clarify this just in case people get confused by this. Is that by calamity and by sabr, because we're talking about being patient now. Sabr means to do everything within your means to alleviate whatever difficulty is that you're coming from, that you're facing. Everything within your physical means to do that. And after having done that and not being able to do anything more than that, the next stage in sabr is to tawakkul, is then to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, is to do everything that's within your means and then to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is called tawakkul. And that's what he's talking about here. When you reach that stage of tawakkul, you have a choice. Either you become reliant on Allah, knowing that he's the only one that can lift this hardship, or you turn away from God. Yeah, you become angry, you become frustrated, you become you move away from God. That's a choice that we make. And he's saying in that state, he said, when you rely on God, then he said your reliance itself is a commendable and rewardable act, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you for it. So I wanted to touch on this idea of contentment. Rida, in Arabic we call it rida or qana'a, which is Ibn al-Qayyim radiyallahu anhu. Ibn al-Qayyim beautifully puts it in his Madarij al-Salikin. He says, for a believer there are three things. He said there's dignity. He said we have dignity and humility. We don't find dignity in boasting. We don't show off. That's not a trait that believers feel is not a worthy. It's not a good trait to have. Right. So boasting and showing off is not where we find our dignity. We find it in humility. But that doesn't mean that humility doesn't mean that we don't do well in an interview. That's to say I'm not very good at selling myself in an interview. That's not what humility is. What you do is, humility is a state of the heart, right? It requires work, it requires effort, it's not false. Falsifying it is a good thing, because it kind of leads you to that, where when you realize that by not showing off, the world hasn't collapsed around me. By not showing off, my friends haven't suddenly left me. By not showing off, people haven't suddenly become judgmental of my capabilities. When you realize none of that happens, then slowly that sense of humility creeps in, and you start seeing the value and benefit of humility, that actually it's a far more contented place to be, in that I don't judge my success, my happiness by how you perceive me, what you think of me. It's a very hard thing to do, and none of us have mastered it. But and people who, your skin gets thicker as you get older, I guess. And when you're young, it's extremely difficult to be able to look over or overlook the judgment of your peer group. It's hard in any peer group, to be fair, but particularly hard when we're young, because obviously as you reach adolescence, and the hormones all over the place, and trying to manage yourself and your self-esteem, and then the people around you, is extremely, extremely difficult. So although you have the building blocks of managing it, you're just not prepared enough, and you're not skilled enough at doing it, which is why it's extremely difficult, and we get sucked. And it's far easier. It's far more demanding physically, but far easier mentally, just to submit and succumb to peer pressure. It's extremely easy to do, much easier to do mentally, but very difficult physically. The problem is, because it's very demanding, to be able to live up to the Instagram and this, that, and the other, and every time you have to kind of put up a certain facade, even the way you dress and so on. It's extremely tiring process. But what happens is, as we get older, we start to kind of change our mindset a bit. It's not true for everybody, but we do start to slowly realize, because you start getting battle hardened, you start getting the people that you once spent years of your youth trying to please, are the people that ultimately can leave you. You can sacrifice a lot of your life, but when it comes to them making sacrifices, they don't make any sacrifices. So all of these frustrations slowly start adding up, and that battle hardens us, and that becomes, meaning over time we become less and less. It's less easy for us to succumb to it so quickly. But that doesn't make us, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it. It still happens all of the time, just not in the same way as it happens for perhaps people that are a lot younger. So dignity in humility, that learning to be, having your self-esteem should come from within. Your sense of self-esteem, your self-worth has to come from within, and that has to, at its core, come from the values that you hold. And every one of us has to hold on to, and first of all, be clear about what are our values, like what are your principles that you live by. If you don't know what they are, then you need to think about them. What are the things that are important to me? And make sure that you never give in on those first principles that make you who you are, and make because being conscious of those just helps you in terms of your interaction with people and in life, because these things will always be there, and they will drive you even though you're not consciously thinking about them. And that's because you've at least thought through what those values and principles are. So there's the real dignity in humility. And he said there's honor in righteousness. Ibn al-Qayyim said there's honor in righteousness. So contentment, then, going on to this point of contentment, I mean, contentment necessarily then requires, how could you be content if you don't know what you're being content with? Like, what's your objective? You can't be content without having a goal. Hopefully that's pretty obvious to people. I mean, how can you be content how do you know you've succeeded in something if you don't even know what you aimed at? Yeah. So it's necessary that for there to be contentment, you have to be clear, what am I being content about? And again, it's easy to fall into this low-hanging fruit. Are you content with Allah? Yes. Who's going to say I'm not? Anyone here can admit I'm not content with God, and here's my shikwa. Right? Not many people are going to write a shikwa. We're not going to say that. So really, it's not about you saying that you're content with God. It's about, what have you done about it? What's the evidence that you're content? If you go to a job interview and they say, what makes you suitable for this role? And you say, I applied for the job. Right? I'm here, aren't I? Right? That's kind of the answer we're giving when we say, we're content, where we're saying, well, I believe in God. So, we'll say God then. Right? There's no real roadmap. There's no experience there. But I don't want to hear that in a job. What I want to hear is, like, what experience, what have you done today that makes you a worthwhile candidate when you come here? Give me the confidence that you're working towards personal development. I want to know that when you do this job, you're not going to just carry history with you. You're going to take it into the future. So how are you going to not just be a good person and that opened a masjid and built 2 dams, 2 wells in Gambia 5 years ago? I want to know about the person that's going to build 2 wells in Gambia next year and for the year after. I want that person. I want you to tell me what you're like, what you're going to be like over the next few years. I do not buy your history. I'm buying your future, right? So your history is just an indication of your future. So if you come to an interview with no history and no concept of the future, but just this one tagline that, well, I'm here, aren't I? I believe in God, and I'm content with God because I'm content with God, sort of thing. Then that's not really a practical step in any way, shape, or form. But it's so easy to fall into. We all fall into it. We all kind of feel. I mean, if I ask, what does contentment look like? Well, we often approach it with, I don't feel discontent. Right? I don't feel discontent. That's the attitude that we will have, and that's a very normal thing to do. That's a very normal thing to do. If someone said, "Are you happy?" Well, it's hard to say, "Am I happy?" Because happy compared to what? But I can say I'm not unhappy. I'm not unhappy. I just don't know what happy means because I was happy when my children were born. Can I really measure this up to that? I was happy when I, moved into my house. Like there's lots of different. I mean, happiness is an endless kind of spectrum of levels of happiness. It's too abstract. So what you can do is we often exclude by saying, well, I'm not unhappy. So when we're talking about contentment, it's actually forward thinking. We should be thinking practically, as in let's get out of the I'm not unhappy, I'm not discontented, and let's ask ourselves, what does contentment look like? How should I make an effort to be content? And I think the first thing that we've got to do is you've got to be clear about your goal. Right? What is it that I'm being contented for, and who am I being contented towards? These are the first things that we have to be clear about. And I think it's too easy to say for God, to be honest. I think it's too easy. And even as a lesson, it's a very easy lesson to deliver. And I can give you like 300 quotes on the importance of being content with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I literally can. There's so many beautiful hadith on this. In fact, there's a beautiful hadith the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in Sahih Bukhari, I think. ليس العرض ليس الرضا وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم there's a it's ليس ليس الغنى كثرة العرض لكن الغنى غنى النفس أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. That to be truly content is not to have all the material things, right? Real contentment is not having everything material that you need. Real contentment is to have whether the soul is content. It's ghina nafs, when your soul feels free, which is why Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi, al-Jawziyah, the third thing that he mentions, he says, is that contentment is freedom. Contentment is freedom. Right? So that's a very important. I think 3 things that he says: humility, dignity in humility, honor in righteousness, and freedom and contentment. That's the 3 things that we kind of aspire towards. But as I said, contentment with God is too easy a thing to just comment on. We've got to really practically think, how do we do that? And I think to do that, start by breaking up your the things that I think it's a good place to start is to look at your life, just to start with a little schema of how your life is. What are the things that are going well in your life, and what are the things that are not so well? What are the things that are important to you and what are not? What are the values that you live by, and what are the values you want to live by? If someone, a good starting point could be, if you wanted someone to, one day we're all going to pass away, we're all going to die. If someone were to write 3 things that you'd want to be remembered for in this world, right? 3 things, 3 impacts that you've had on people around you, what would they be? What's the impact that you want to have on people? What do you want people to remember you for? And remember, that's the Prophet ﷺ told us that once we pass away, we'll become stories and the memories of the people that are left behind, right? That's a fact. And righteous people leave righteous memories, right? That's as simple as that. The people that have had the most positive impact on our lives are the people that we remember for those things. And often the beauty of love, the beauty of true connection to somebody is that you forget all the difficulties. On a very personal note, when my father passed away, all my memories from then to now are all about the few things that happened, but the few good things that happened. I don't remember the difficulties. I don't remember the shouting or anything like that. That all, in fact, even those times when my father got angry with me, that were once upsetting when I was young, are the very things that when you lose that person, you'd love to have that back again, right? Even the things that at the time you dislike become the things that become beloved to you, because when you lose someone that you love, then when they've really made a positive impact on your life, then what you do is everything gets transformed into something of beauty, everything. So when we're gone, people are going to remember us, and the question is, how are they going to remember us? Has all the the things that we've done in our life that may have not gone so well, maybe have had a negative impact on somebody, are they going to be transformed into a thing of beauty? When they remember us fondly? Or is it that everything that we've done in our life, good or bad, will just be another reason for us, for people to be grateful that we're no longer here? Yeah. So we become the memories of other people, and and really all of that gets averaged out into how the impact that we've had on people. So even the negative stuff gets transformed to good, or the good gets transformed into negative stuff, if that's the kind of real impact that we've had on people. So start with that. Maybe if you want to know what drives you, then ask yourself, how do you want to be remembered? And then ask yourself, if you were gone tomorrow, is that how people remember you? And that gives you where you want to be and where you are right now, and it gives you something to work towards. That's where we want to. That's probably a good place to start. Where are you right now, and where do you want to be? And go take the steps to get there. Take the steps to get there. Now, now I'm making an assumption here that we don't want to be remembered as somebody who's rich, financially rich. Maybe you want to be remembered as somebody who is generous. That's a far more noble thing to be remembered for. So start that generosity now. If you're somebody who is wants to be remembered as somebody who's who's forbearing, patient, who is caring, considerate, loving, somebody who is devoted, a devoted spouse, a devoted child, a devoted worshipper to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, somebody who worked in the community, somebody who cared about other people and worked for them. However you want to be remembered, ask yourself, what are we doing right now to work towards that ambition? And that ambition should be ultimately something that is, and I guarantee you it will be, when it's memories that you're left with, when you have to think about how people will remember you when you've gone, the beauty of that way of approaching it is personal glory kind of or material wealth goes out the window. You realize very quickly material means nothing in that transaction. Like none of that. Hopefully nobody is thinking of material benefit that they've had on somebody, right? What you want is people to remember the spiritual, the psychological benefit that you've had on them, maybe the physical benefit that you've had on them, but not necessarily just somebody who was rich, somebody who drove a good car, somebody who had a big house, somebody who was, nobody remembers that. Nobody even remembers, oh, you had X number of children. What they remember is that you left good children behind, or that you've left, or you were a caring parent, a considerate parent. These are the sorts of things that hopefully people aspire towards. I think in doing that, once you've got an idea of the things that are important to you, that's when the next step is we've got to ask ourselves is what you'll find is all of these things are quite abstract, right? You'll find they're not specific goals. Like you don't want to be remembered because you opened let's say for example, you've done one good deed, like you paid us, one or two good major deeds, but good deeds that you've done in your life. What want to be remembered for is what those deeds represent. So if you've given a well somewhere in a foreign country, what you want to be remembered for is really, you want people to make dua for you. God will make dua for you and remember you that you gave in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You don't want them to remember you as somebody who just had a lot of money and happened to give them a well. That's the worst thing that can happen, guys. That's the one thing you don't want. Right? You don't want specifics in that case. You don't want people to remember you as the person who owned a house. You don't even want people to remember you as being generous. What you want people to remember you for in that case is you want them to remember that in their time of need, you cared for them, you gave for them, and you want them to pray for you and remember you every single time that they drink from that well and benefit from that well, so that it becomes a sadaqah jariyah for you. So what happens is a lot of the most important things in our life are actually quite abstract. They're not down to the material level. And if that's the case, then I think this is where it becomes not easier to be more content, but it becomes clearer as to what contentment means. Because when you abstract away from the specifics, what you'll come to realize is the amount of the deed doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that you've, like, for example, if ultimately you want people to remember you as, let's say, somebody who was generous, right? Generous, then the amount of time you give somebody is no longer relevant. The amount of money you give somebody is no longer relevant. None of that's relevant. What's relevant is that when their time of need came, that you were there for them, right? It's the times that you choose. And sometimes when you made sacrifices, your own personal sacrifices for them, that may be that you donated 10 minutes of your life to somebody in their hour of need. And that 10 minutes was at a time when you couldn't afford to spare that 10 minutes, and yet you did it anyway, right? When that person sees that, right, or if they could see that, that would be far more valuable for you than the hours on end that you spent anywhere else. Yeah. So the conception of generosity is not about the amount of money you give. It's actually the intention that drives it, that how much I'm giving this because I'm doing this because I'm doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't have much money, but I'm going to give what I have, right? It's giving that small amount regularly, or giving some amount regardless of the amount, but doing it with that sense of that higher purpose in mind. That's a step towards contentment. And I'll tell you why. It's a step towards contentment because ultimately we don't have within our gift the ability to control the goal. We can't control whether me giving £1,000 to a charity means that somebody somewhere will be better off. I can't control whether somebody will or will not, because for all I know, that £1,000 I gave was split between 10,000 orphans, and the amount of money that was eventually meant that nobody was really better off. So, it's possible that I don't know what happens there. So whether I might have given £1,000, but somebody down the road might have given £50, and that £50 went through to an orphan and benefited them, and that child was able to eat that night and eat the following night and the night after that, and they may have got through the whole of the fasting period on that £50 that this person donated. You gave 1,000 and somebody gave 50, and yet we don't see the end, but it's very possible that they had the outcome was far greater in terms of materially with that £50 than it was that £1,000. We can't control that. That's not within our gift to control. So therefore, we can't put our contentment, a sense of feeling an achievement on whether we've had that kind of impact, whether we've achieved the goal or not. We shouldn't put it on that. What we've got to put it in is have I done the best that I can? Is my intention pure? And by best that I can is that have I done my due diligence? That's within your gift, right? Before you donate, make sure you've done your due diligence so that you're giving it to a charity that's reputable and that you can trust will give it to the to the people that are intended recipients, and that the money that I'm giving, whatever it is that I'm giving, have I am I doing this with the best of intention? Ask yourself that question. Is what's the harm in just stopping, pausing for a second, and just checking your intention, and give that money. And when you give that money, and as long as you've done those, that background check, inshallah, you have no idea whether it'll get to the end goal or not. But you've done your bit, right? You're done, you finish, you stop there and you leave it. And then what you do is contentment, is to say, now it's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's completely within the gift, within Allah, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as to how it's used. I've given my money, whatever I could, whatever tawfiq I had, I've given it in the way of Allah. Now, whatever happens with that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a really easy example, because it's about giving money in the way of God. In the same way, if we take to financial aspirations, right? Financial aspirations, what we should ask ourselves, what we should be stopping and thinking about is, why do I want all of this? What do I really want out of life? And to be content is not to say, I'm going to earn, I want to have a pension fund that when I'm 45 or 50 that I can retire, and then I'm going to just live a solitary life and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's not really a practical intention. It's not a practical intention. And also, it doesn't really bode well for a sense of contentment either, rida, because how do you know you're going to live to 40 or 50? In fact, how do you know that you'll probably even live to 30? You don't know. So what happens if you lose your job at the age of 35 and you spend the next 3 years just using up your savings so that you can just get by? You don't know. The level of frustration that may create inside you means that a sense of contentment is going to suffer. And the reason for that is because what you're doing is, your goal is it's almost too specific in that case, right? So what we're doing is you're putting a goal in material things rather than what those material things represent. When you abstract away from the material things and to what they represent, you realize that the amount is not important. What's important is that you've done it. You've started with that. I've done it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you put all of your hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He accept it from you. But you don't then start worrying about how it's going to be received at the other end, or what don't worry about what you do at 50. Worry about what you're doing right now. So if you're 35, don't tell yourself, from 55 I'm going to retire, I'm going to become an imam in a masjid or whatever. Tell yourself, at the age of 35, you don't know whether you're going to live till 50. So right now, whatever means that I have at the moment, whatever I have at my disposal right now, how can I put this to good use? How can I put my skills to good use? What can I do with it? And make yourself available. Do whatever it is that you, whatever skill that you have, make it available to people or to the people around you, and always have in the back of your mind that ultimately the way you live your life, the average of your life is how people are going to remember you. And if you don't know right at this stage, if you at this moment in time, if you don't know, if you're not clear about that, then just drop everything and spend a day, 2 days just reflecting on, if someone was to remember you after you've passed away, what are the three things or 5 things that you'd want them to remember you for? And then I'm telling you that the goal, what you'll achieve, those 5 things will not be material things. And then you'll discover that those 5 things are things you can do right now. Start right now, without money, without anything. You can do those 5 things right now. And when you start doing them, you realize that the goal doesn't matter. It's the aim, the noble aim, that's important. And that, I think, will, inshallah, lead to at least start the way, the roadmap, I guess, is probably the way to look at it. The roadmap to being a bit more content in what we're doing, where we're not so objective orientated that we lose sight of the journey, which is the far more important bit, because we have no control of the objective. We have no control of the goal. We have no idea whether we'll live long enough to see the fruits of our labor. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't judge you by the end. He judges you by the means, and He judges you by the moment. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the tawfiq to live according to our higher purpose, and to live with the ultimate purpose in mind, and gives the tawfiq to not live with the love of material wealth and material gains, but rather what they represent, which ultimately will which hopefully will take us towards towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of people who are content rather than people of just sheer happiness. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of people who are willing to sacrifice the present for the future, because that's all part of contentment. It's about, sometimes when you're clear about those goals, in fact, we do this, we are willing to, people who wanted to study medicine went through years of sacrificing time with their friends, sacrificing time in the park, all of these things that kind of made up our youth that we look back now fondly at. There are many people out there that sacrifice all of that so they can get the best grades that they could to do the job that they're doing now. So this idea that we have to sacrifice the present for the future is also quite important, but doing so in a way that it's not just about but do it where you do it consciously and for the right reasons. Because as I said, sacrifice the present for the future doesn't mean you pause the present for the future. You've got to live in the present. You've got to make your intentions for the present, and you've got to live as though you're only going to live today, but plan as though you may live tomorrow. Yeah. So live and breathe and intend as though you're going to live today, which means people are going to judge you by the way you are today, but plan as though you may live, to the year after or the year after that. So I don't want people to take away from this that somehow we should pause everything about the future and just think about the moment. It isn't about that. We're not people of, that's called ego, that's called nafs. Nafs the nafs lives purely in the moment. The nafs lives purely in the moment. And people, and hawa, there's different words for the word ego in Arabic. The word nafs is the ego that lives in the moment. The word hawa is the one that lives in the future, right? Hawa is like desires following your just whims, right? That's the one that's in the future, so we don't want to, we're neither people of hawa nor are we people of the nafs, and nor are we people that live in the past. We're people who live in the present. We learn from the past and we plan for the future, and we accept that the future is not inevitable. So we sacrifice the present for the future, and we don't live purely for happiness. This is something that Aristotle said. He said ultimately the objective of everyone is to achieve happiness. That's the highest purpose. And he was right and he was wrong. He was right in that he believed happiness is the objective, but he was wrong in that his definition of happiness was not about, it wasn't ukhrawi happiness, it wasn't falah, it wasn't Jannah, it wasn't the it was happiness in this temporal world rather than happiness in the most permanent abode, which is the hereafter. So we believe in that, but we believe we believe in happiness in the hereafter, not necessarily happiness here. So we don't live, the Muslims have never had this problem of God doesn't love us because somehow we're going through difficulty, or God doesn't love us. We've never had the problem with evil in Islam. We've never had this. This is a very it's a Catholic problem. It was very much a problem in the church. If God loves us, why is there evil in the world? The Muslims have never had this issue because we've never gone down this route. We believe that happiness is judged in terms of the scale is off the scale, because when we think of happiness, we think of and God's judgment, we think purely about the hereafter. We accept that this is a world of trials and tribulations and difficulties. So I'm going to leave just one note. I completely went off my. I had a couple of things I wanted to say, but I've not mentioned any of them. Just to kind of be clear about what I'm saying, because there's a lot said there. Is I said the abstract purpose you've got to hold on to. I'm going to give you one example. Let's say I want to help people, right? If you say I want to help people, that's my goal, you physically can't fail in that. You literally can't. You can't, because it's such an abstract goal. It's I want to help people. Well, you can help people in so many different ways. You can help people by getting a job. You help your parents. You can help people by helping them with their GCSEs. You can help people by setting up an internet business, make it as cheap as possible, make it free for people, where you're teaching youngsters how to how to pass exams. There's a lot of people out there on the internet at the moment helping people using the skills that they have. You can help people in lots of different ways, big or small. You can bake cookies, for goodness sake, and hand them out to your local care home. You can do whatever you want, as big or as little as you want. You can help your siblings, you can help yourself. Helping people is a very abstract goal, but it's a noble goal to have. It's a good goal to have. So it's better that you say, I want to help as many people as I can, than to say I'm going to help 1,000 people or 500. And this is, don't take this as a hard and fast one. The point here is about having goals that are aspirational, but at the same time don't lead you to frustration, and having goals that are aspirational, but also they create a fear of failure. And what we don't want is, we don't want to have that fear. We don't want failure in this. So make sure your goals are clear. Make sure your goals are clearly defined, but at the same time, don't create frustration for yourself. So if you want to be a person of consideration, of helping people, then make that your goal, that I want to help people. That's you, and you'll be satisfied, you'll be content, because whether you help one person or 1,000,000 people, your sense of achievement should not be any different. Right? Your sense of achievement should be there whether you help one person or 1,000,000 people. You shouldn't be discontented or feel like I haven't reached my goal if you just help one person your whole life. And of course, you'll help many more. But that's an example of having a clear goal, but at the same time being content regardless of how you achieve it. Put your effort into doing something well, rather than the quantity of what you do. If you're going to give money, don't worry about, I'm going to make sure it's £5,000. I'm going to do whatever I can to raise it, and if I fail it, I'm going to don't create that sort of stuff for yourself. Rather, take £50 and ask yourself, how am I going to use this £50 the best way I can? Right? How do I give this £50? Put effort into the charity that you give to, and follow up on it. Who is it going to? I want to know about them. Maybe get to know that person that you donated to. Do things with ihsan, to the best of your ability. Don't create. So anyway, back to the beginning of this, which is about contentment. And I said it's easy to say I'm content with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the context of this is about being content with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree of hardship, and what we face is it's from the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's easy to say these sorts of things, but actually the reality of it is about training oneself to manage and be content. And to do that, you have to have goals, and those goals can't be ridiculous goals where they are purely material, because the material value means nothing to any, well, it means something to some, doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to somebody else. So material goals are really not that beneficial, because if I make £1,000 my aim to go and help people, because I've told myself somehow £1,000 is going to help somebody, there might be somebody else with £10 that gets to one person and benefits them far more than my £1,000 that is kind of scattered into pennies and handed out to 1,000,000 people. So don't put your hopes in these sorts of things. Rather, focus on just do what you can within your remit to help people, and then inshallah you'll be more content, because what you'll do is you'll create a lifestyle of helping people, rather than focusing on the numbers and the maths of how many people that you've impacted, and giving yourself frustration if you don't achieve it. Similarly, don't tell yourself you're going to be I mean, there's no harm in being aspirational, but really your contentment should be in that you want to be successful, and ask yourself that you're going to put everything within your power to be successful, inshallah. But then think about, what does success look like? What is success for you? Success can't be money, right? It just can't be money, because that's a bad aim to have. That's a very bad upbringing if that's your goal, and if that's what you think. It can't be money. It's, what does money represent that I want and that I need? And then really break that down. And I think what you'll end up with is you realize that everything you aspire for with money is the stuff that you already have, truly, and the stuff that you don't have, that you're hoping for, is all literally is material. And if that's the case, then there's no way you can be content with something material. So there's no point trying to be content with material, because it's not going to happen, because material is by definition temporal. So find your contentment, the things that will last, things that you want to be remembered for, things that are permanent and higher goals, aspirational goals that are abstract, that are not on specifics, and ultimately link those back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't just help people, want to help people for the sake of God. Don't just want to give charity, want to give charity for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you know, and have that as your goal. And if that happens, inshallah, then regardless of how far along the journey you get in terms of your you know, aspiration, there's no way of you feeling hopefully there isn't you won't feel discontented, and you won't feel a lack of you won't feel frustration. And in the same way, when we have you know, when we face hardships, it's important, and this is a lot more difficult to cover, but when we have hardships, it's very hard to be content. It's very hard to be content because everything that we put our hopes into is again, a lot of what we put our hopes into, or rather, is very material. Is when we lose somebody that we love, why are we upset for them? Like, what are we upset about? Yeah. And ultimately that rida, that sense of rida, of being content with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that pure way, is actually stems from iman. Right? That type of rida is very much about, you know, iman. So there's rida in terms of practical rida of learning to be content with what you have in your life, and then there's the rida in terms of accepting the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you're going to lose someone, you're going to lose someone. There's nothing that you can do about it. That is, you know, that comes down to the faith that you have in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think learning to be content with the things that you have in life, and getting used to losing things and not getting things, you know, having that is definitely a training ground for managing difficulties when they arise. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does say in Surah Tawbah, He says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, He said, is your wealth, are your wives, your children, your families, and your families, and the wealth that you've acquired, and the assets that you fear losing. Allah says, are all of these things more beloved to you, material things? That's why I said you can't be content with material things. Allah says all of these, including loved ones. He mentions parents, He mentions children, He mentions subhanahu wa ta'ala, spouses, He mentions you know, everyone that's closest to us. And then He mentions the wealth that we have and the assets that we acquire, and He says, you know, وَتِجَارَةٌ تَخْشَوْنَ كَسَادَهَا, and the businesses that we fear will lose, right? That we fear will lose. Ahabba ilaykum, are these more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger and striving in His way? Are they more beloved to you than striving in His way? This idea that if your heart is connected to these things, then you are necessarily you're disconnected, and it's more beloved to you than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. According to this verse in Surah Tawbah, it is called Tawbah though, so it's about returning back to Allah. But then what does Allah say? فَتَرَبَّصُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ. Allah says, and if that is the case, then wait. فَتَرَبَّصُوا means then wait until the command of the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. A threat that if you love these things so much, then wait, because the command of God will come. In other words, each of these things will be taken away from you. Bit by bit, these things will be taken away from us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that inna Allah la yuhibbul fasiqeen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that and He ends that by saying, God does not love those who are people of grave sin, the fasiq. So there's the association made with people who love things, material gain, more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. God refers to them as the fasiqeen. But He also very powerfully, He says, فَتَرَبَّصُوا, He says, wait. In other words, it's like a threat to say, if these things are more beloved to you, then wait till God brings His command. And when that happens, when you lose these things, which it's not to say that only those people lose them, it's to say that your test of your connection to your Lord will happen when these things are taken away from you. And you will learn, if you're not going to become content with the God, you'll be forced to become content with God, because nobody will be left, nothing will be left. And that's what happens in reality. As we get older, we lose more people that are around us. The businesses that we have fail, and you know, we try the things, and then very quickly you realize that nothing's permanent, and you get the battle scars that I spoke about at the beginning. And the only thing that remains, la yabqa illa wajhullah, there's nothing remains except the countenance of God. There's nothing that actually is permanent except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's when it comes to hardships, it's learning to train ourselves with everything that we have to try and be contented, so that we don't put all our faith in that material wealth, faith in even people, right? If you want to be content, don't put your faith in people, put your faith in God, right? And do it through people. Have husn al-dhan. Husn al-dhan means always have good opinion for people, but don't put your faith in people. Yeah, there's a difference. Trust people, but don't trust people, but also don't put your but there's a difference in trusting people and putting your complete faith in them, because people are human beings and people make mistakes. We're fallible, and people will stab you in the back. They'll do it deliberately, and sometimes people will do it mistakenly. People will let you down. These things are all fused into our existence, into this great fabric of our existence, so that we can learn that nothing is permanent, that everything around us ultimately fails us and lets us down. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one in all of this that's permanent, that never changes. So literally everything around us is forcing us to direct ourselves towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this verse comes in Surah Tawbah just to remind us that, look, it's very easy to become distracted. We have Surah At-Takathur that does the same thing, Al-Hakum At-Takathur. God tells us, Al-Hakum At-Takathur, very powerful verse, Surah Al-Hakum, that At-Takathur means abundance, that you've had too much. Excess has blinded you. Excess has distracted you. Al-Hakum At-Takathur. Excess has distracted you. Hatta zurtumul maqabir, until you reach the grave. حتى زرتم المقابر كلا سوف تعلمون ثم كلا سوف تعلمون. Then you will know, then you will certainly know. كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين, and you will then come to know with yaqeen, with certainty. كلا لترونها عين اليقين, and certainly you will see it with the eye of certainty. I mean, not only will you know it with certainty, what was important in life, but you will see it with certainty. كلا لترونها عين الجحيم ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. And then Allah ends that surah with, and on that day you will be asked about all the you'll be asked about the na'im that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you in this world. So everything we spoke about, which the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that surround us, that we can easily lose, the Quran tells us that on that day when God questions us and says, you were distracted by the material world, and I've told the material world is, Surah Tawbah tells us what the material world is, and many other verses tell us this. It's the family, it's the children, it's the spouses, it's the money, all of these things are classed as material, right? Anything that's not immediately, directly leading you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't look at it with that perspective, is material. He says, on that day, and in Na'im, you will be asked about all the things that distracted you. Al-Hakum At-Takathur, having too much has distracted you. God says on that day you'll be asked about all the blessings that He gave you and what you did with them. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us patience in difficulty, and to remove difficulty from us, and to give us sabr, and to give us ability to have shukr, to have gratitude for all the good things that we have in our life, and give us the tawfiq to be content in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in good times and bad. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to have perspective, and to learn from the mistakes of others before we make them ourselves. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.